Yep.
We're rolling. Good afternoon. Welcome to the celebration of life for Dick Scar. It's just wonderful to see you all. The family had no idea if 12 were going to show up or 1,200. And here you are, a full room on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and we're just so grateful for you to be here today. Thank you for coming. The sharing in the service is going to be brief, and then we're going to heartily encourage you all to stay for cookies and conversation and tell stories all afternoon. And hope that you can do that and that we can truly celebrate Dick's life together. I'm Rebecca Kemper-Poos, the pastor here, and Dick and Jan have been involved in this church for many years, and I understand Kathy and Ken were also back in the day part of this church, and we're very honored to celebrate with you and to host today. I want to thank the members of the Congregational Church for helping in the kitchen and the sanctuary, and it's just, we're really delighted to be able to share this time together today. So I do want you to be thinking of your stories and your memories, sad and funny, and to be prepared to share those as we fellowship around the table and the cookies later. We're also, I think, going to move the pictures to the other room. So if you didn't get a chance to see the wonderful slideshow, you'll have a chance to do that after the service as well. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your love and support of Dick Scar and his family through many years, whether you knew him from many, many years back or a few months ago. You are welcome here, and we are grateful for your presence. And now Ken Scar, Dick's son, is going to share with us about his dad.
Thank you. Wow. Well, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Thank you all so much for being here. It's just wonderful to be back in this church that I grew up going to. I was the head of the youth group back in 1987 when I was a senior, which was a few years ago. Have you guys noticed that you get to an age and everything was a long time ago? But I'm just so, the whole family, me, Mom, and Kathy are so grateful that you guys made the effort to be here. And really, it's just so nice these days to be in a room full of people in Buena Vista and actually recognize some of them. It feels like I don't know anybody in this town anymore sometimes. And my dad kind of had something to do with that, but we'll get to that. Now for my prepared remarks. December 2012, I came home to Buena Vista for Christmas leave after serving a year-long deployment in Afghanistan. It was one of the best holidays of my life. Finally home after a year at war. But it turned out that while I was here, my house back at Fort Hood, Texas, was being robbed of just about everything I owned. I got back to Killeen to discover I'd been cleaned out. My furniture, my kids' toys, the food in my kitchen, my washer and dryer, my clothes, and my truck was parked in the garage, so they went ahead and just took that too. Most likely they probably put my own stuff in my own truck and like drove off with it, and then came back and got more and just did that until there was nothing left to take. Thankfully I had renter's insurance, but when I filled out the claim, the insurance company asked me for a list of everything that was taken. Exactly what from my life was missing. That seems like it would be pretty simple, but it was an almost impossible task. How do you remember every book on your shelf, every toy you bought your kids, every shirt in your closet? I couldn't have come up with an accurate list if I had 100 years. So this moment and that moment are alike for me because my dad is a critical thread in the fabric of my life. How can I stand up here and sum him up? List all the things. It's impossible. How do you find the words to describe a person who is too big for words in the story of your life? But I'm gonna try. So I'm a writer, so I just put together a bunch of stuff. It's gonna be a little hodgepodge. My dad taught me by example to work hard. If you're going to do something, do it right. And don't be afraid to take big chances. Before he came to Buena Vista, he was an aerospace engineer, like a legit engineer. He worked for United Airlines and Pratt & Whitney, where he worked on the fuel cells for NASA's Apollo command modules, among many other things. Like, he was the real deal. But a rafting trip through the Grand Canyon in 1970 changed everything for my parents. It turned out to be an existential experience for them both. And afterwards, they could not bear the thought of raising me and Kathy in a city. They entered an ad in the Gunnison paper from a guy named Al McClellan, who some of you might remember, who was looking for a partner to start an outdoor guiding and sporting goods business, and the rest is history. Mom and Dad sold the house in San Francisco, packed their life into a little powder blue Volkswagen Beetle, and drove our family 1,200 miles to Buena Vista, sight unseen. Like, literally, Mom and Dad had never seen this town until they were driving down Trout Creek Pass to live here. That was 1972. I was 3 years old and Kathy was 1. Looking back on that now, I'm in awe of the audacity it took to make a complete life change like that with 2 young children. When they got here, Mom and Dad were kind of seen as the weird new hippie couple in town. Here's this young couple from California thinking tourism could be a viable business in a one-stoplight town full of miners, ranchers, and prison workers, and spouting off about protecting and preserving the environment. Hell, even I thought my parents were hippies until I was like 23. I was like, wait, you didn't go to Woodstock? But I was flabbergasted to discover Dad was a pretty hardcore Goldwater Republican, which I think is an extinct species these days. Yeah, my parents grew up on farms in Iowa, where family values conservatives, not liberal longhairs. But Dad was a stalwart environmentalist and had no problem causing a ruckus when he felt it was needed. He had no problem whatsoever dropping a scorching letter to the editor in the Chaffee County Times on what seemed like a bi-weekly basis when I was growing up. He'd go back and forth in those pages week to week with trophy hunters, developers, and anyone else he deemed a villain, fraudster, or racketeer bent on desecrating the wildness of the places he considered sacred. He and his foes couldn't have those instant back and forths like we do today through social media. They had to wait a week until the next issue of the paper came out to respond to each other. So those arguments could last a long time. There's some glorious slapbacks on those pages, let me tell you. And there's one guy in particular, and I hate that I've forgotten his name, but he and Dad went back and forth on the editorials page for years, mostly about how much territory in this valley should be open to motorized vehicles, as I recall. It got pretty combative and more than a little passive aggressive at times. But when that man died, I think it was around 1994, Dad went to his funeral. It was a different time, when this town was still filled with old school outlaws, my dad being one of them. His love for the wild places of the world was a guiding force of his life. In the 80s, he started a group called the Green Elephants for Republicans who cared about the environment. And that made him a bit of a unicorn. So when the powers that be in DC found out about him, they flew him out multiple times to lobby Congress for the creation of the Collegiate Peaks, Buffalo Peaks, Mount Holy Cross Wilderness areas, closing down those areas to anything but foot traffic forever. You better believe there were some outraged letters to the editor when he did that. Today we can thank my dad for all the priceless wilderness areas surrounding us now that are protected forever. We can also thank him that Elephant Rock is not at the bottom of a lake, right, Stuart? That the prison lights don't keep people up at night. Dad always found a cause to fight for. Sometimes those fights lasted for decades. Reed and I were just talking about that. But he did not quit. Oops. There we go. Growing up, our lives revolved around everything outdoors, to the point where I absolutely hated hiking and camping. It was a job, it was the family business. I just wanted to stay home and watch TV. Of course, now I know how blessed Kathy and I were to have the childhoods we did. Pretty freaking amazing, right, sis? Afternoons above tree line, hiking the Grand Canyon, moonlight ski tours. On a clear night, the moonlight reflecting off the snow makes the world look as bright as day. It's magical. And we got to live that stuff on a regular basis, thanks to our mom and dad. My dad was familiar with death. He was on the Chaffee County Search and Rescue Team for more than 30 years. He kept a pack ready in the hallway for when he'd get called out in the middle of the night on a moment's notice to go into the mountains and find some Texan who got lost in the wood or crashed their plane. On more than a few occasions, he helped find bodies lying in scree fields and snow drifts at the bottom of cliffs, or simply where they died of exhaustion on the side of the trail. Dad helped carry all those people out. Dad helped carry all those people out of the wilderness and return them to their families. On one occasion, Dad had to recover one of his good friends, Art Evans, who was killed in an avalanche on Monarch Pass, or near Monarch Pass, on January 14, 1975. Art was 32 and his skiing companion, Keith Rush, was only 22. That morning, they broke track through 2 feet of powder for miles, my dad did and the rest of the team, in the shadows as the sun was setting until they found the avalanche site. And there my dad spotted a frozen hand sticking out of the snow. It was Art. I think that moment changed him. I think that's when he really started contemplating what happens to a person when they die. Where do they go? In his later years, he thought about that more than ever. Today, the area where Art Evans and his friend Keith died is known as the Evans Rush Trail, and many of you probably know it well. In 1982, my dad had to be rescued himself when the Army Huey helicopter he was riding in on a search and rescue mission crashed into the trees near Cronky Lake, killing the man he was sitting back to back with instantly, and very nearly killing him. Dad's helmet was split in half by the impact. And today we would know to call what happened to him a TBI, traumatic brain injury. That day my dad suffered one of the most serious TBIs you could imagine. And if you believe in miracles, I know some of you here do, the fact my dad lived through that is a miracle. That was a turning point for our family. Today there's no question to me that my dad was a hero, as heroic as any of the soldiers I served with in Afghanistan. Exhibit A for that claim is the fact he continued to serve with Chaffee County Search and Rescue for 3 more decades after that crash. 2 years after that crash, in 1984, an arsonist burned down our shop, forcing Mom and Dad to start the business back up from square one. Many of you here probably remember the legendary fire sale, where you could buy smoke-damaged merchandise for pennies on the dollar. Cars were lined up on both sides of Highway 24 for what seemed like miles. What I remember is how this community rallied around our family and helped them get it done. If you were at that fire sale, raise your hand. That was when I realized we weren't the outsiders here anymore. We were a part of this community, and this community was a part of us. So what was it like to be Richard Scar's son? Well, in my younger years, I had a healthy fear of him. There weren't a lot of I love yous between us, to be honest. That, I think, was a result of his upbringing on the farm in Iowa. Farm is a hard living, and all our relatives here can attest to that fact. I don't think he got a lot of I love yous from his dad. He was passionate about the things he cared about, his family, his business, the environment, maybe almost too passionate, because sometimes I wondered if my dad wasn't a little crazy. Like the night he shot the TV. Like literally pointed a pistol and put a bullet through it. He thought it was turning his kids' minds to mush and stealing our time together as a family. And he also had a couple of Molsons. But he woke Kathy and I up and brought us out into the living room before he did it, so a bullet wouldn't go through the wall and hurt us. But I remember so well watching him aim and bang! Little sharp sparks coming out of the hole in TV. I was devastated, man. No more Scooby-Doo! I cried all night. No more Captain Caveman, oh my God. We went without TV for more than a year after that. Maybe 2 years, I don't quite remember. But lo and behold, that turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me, because that was when I learned to love reading. And that changed the trajectory of my life. So Molson inspired or not, his plan worked. Today, when my kids can't get their eyes off their damn phones for hours, I totally understand why he did that. I'll also say, for a guy that shot our TV, Dad sure did love TV. He had a great sense of humor and loved watching Saturday Night Live, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Cheers, Night Court, and in his later years, Craig Ferguson. Dad's joyous burst of laughter would fill the house at night, man. And that was my introduction to show business. I wanted to make cool stuff that cool, that made people like my dad happy. And that notion would drive my life for a long time. It's no doubt why I ended up working in show business for a good portion of my life. My dad never stopped being my dad. I had to move back in with my parents after college for a couple of years when I was in my early 20s. And again in my early 40s after my marriage ended abruptly. Before I joined the Army. He never questioned it, at least out loud. Just took me in when it was my time to report to my first duty station at Fort Hood. It was my dad who drove me down there in my 1998 Toyota 4Runner, towing a 4x8 trailer with all my stuff inside. Dad arranged for all the hotels along the way, and when he got there, he stood by my side as I checked into this entirely new life I was about to embark on. When it was time for him to fly back to Colorado, I drove him to the Killeen Airport, which is named the Bob Gray Airfield, by the way. I never got over that. Man, I didn't want him to go. He was my dad, and when he was with me, I knew I would be okay. I cried the whole way back to the hotel. I was 41 years old. He never stopped being my dad. And I'm happy to say, that the I love yous did come in time. Dad softened with age. And at some point after I went off to college, we did start saying it to each other. More and more often, to the point where we would say it at every goodbye, no matter what, whether in person or on the phone. So I'm at peace knowing that the last time we spoke and the last time he heard my voice, it was me saying, I love you, Dad. He's only been gone, sorry guys, get it together, Scar. He's only been gone for a few weeks, but so far something random has reminded me of him every day, and I don't think that will ever stop. For the rest of my life, when I hear the bell tones of a mountain stream, or when I'm in a quiet meadow and a breeze rustles the trees, when the sun winks at me through the trees on a late afternoon walks in the wood, when I hear big band music, when I'm looking at the night sky, when I smell pine, he'll be there. In those moments, maybe I'll say it out loud. Maybe it will just be a passing thought, but the words will come. I love you, Dad. Thanks, guys.
It was wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much. Mary Lee, do we have a microphone? So we are going to spend a few minutes sharing some stories around the room, and I will come to you with a microphone.
This is for the grandkids who can't be here.
Hi, I'm Reed Dills, and I met Dick when Karen and I moved here in 1976 to start a rafting company. And we spent the early years with his partner, Al McClellan, because Al was kind of the guy that did the rafting for the business. But I just wanted to talk about the time period between 1987 and 2012, and that's only going to take a few minutes. In 1987, a study was done that determined there were some really good opportunities to build dams on the river. One was above Buena Vista and one was in Browns Canyon. And that's when people started to get a little bit upset. For those of you that don't know the history of rafting in the state, it basically started, on the Arkansas, it basically started with Dick and Jan. And then we came in a year or two later, and there was hardly anybody rafting. But by 1987, it was really going big time. And it was interesting. In 1987, the local politicians, the water people, they were just so gung-ho for having a dam. Well, in 1990, Colorado Springs filed for the dam, the Elephant Rock Dam. And Dick was among many people, but primarily, I think, instrumental in creating the Friends of the Arkansas River. in 1991. So right after this designation, this statement by Colorado Springs was made, the Friends of Arkansas was formed, and three weeks later, we had thousands of signatures, we had half a dozen environmental groups, we had the rafting people, Doug Reagan, who you probably don't know, he was another city guy, but he was a kayaker that was really big time with this. And so it took us 3 weeks for that to happen, but so Friends of Arkansas was formed in 91. In 98, Colorado Springs Utilities filed to put a hold on building the reservoir. But it wasn't until 2012 when the final court case decreed that there would be no dam built on the Arkansas River. So whatever you've heard about, Dick, you haven't heard about perseverance, and this is about the best example of perseverance I can think of. After this happened, Dick and I got together, and the organization still had, they raised thousands and thousands of dollars. They went to Washington, just talked, they changed the minds of the powers to be on the upper Arkansas to stop this reservoir. Many of you can remember signs of, they're up and down the valley for years, don't dam the Arkansas River. And so anyway, that court order was a blessing, but just imagine, 1987 to 2012, that's how long it took for that to happen. And one of the things that we decided to do was, there was still $5,000 left after all those years that had been raised. And so we donated that to the environmental group American Rivers. So that was the last thing we did with what was left.
Awesome. Thanks, Reed.
Wonderful story, important sharing.
Hi, I'm Margie Gray, and we met Dick and Jan as soon as they moved here. Went into their little store, which used to be where the Evergreen was, which is now, it's that little restaurant on on the highway that's been tearing apart. You know, it was the, you know where it is. Anyway, the left-hand side where it used to have the domed glass was their trailhead. So that was the trailhead. It was still the cafe, you know, the bar. It wasn't a cafe, it was a little diner. And then to the left was that. Jan and I became friends, and we've been with the League of Women Voters. We've done lots of things. And Dick, we traveled to Habitat for Humanity trips together, Bob and I, and Dick and Jan and other people. We went to New Zealand and traveled the Milford Trek together. We had lots of, Ken mentioned the cross-country ski trips. We did lots of those, moonlight trips. There were just many different things that we did that I enjoyed with Dick and Jan. And I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yes, so one of the things that Bob and Dick and Jan had done is been many, many trips in the Grand Canyon, going off the North Rim. And Ken and Kathy had been, and they had some other friends. And I was always teaching, was my excuse, and I couldn't go. And so when I retired, Dick and Jan said, you know, you've got to come to the Grand Canyon. And so we went with the Grand Canyon Field Institute, a raft trip through the Grand Canyon, which was just awesome. We had little rafts, went through, it was October, we had fires, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences, you know. And then we hiked out with Dick and Jan coming out of the Bright Angel Trail. So anyway, that was something that, but Dick was always there to, you know, to make sure other people enjoyed the wilderness and that, and Jan too, so.
Hi everybody, I'm Leah Cerise. I first met Dick in the 1980s in a little shop that was, I think, where Mailboxes is now. And my dad introduced me to him, thinking that it would be a good fit for me to be working in the outdoors, sporting goods. And at the time, Dick didn't need anybody. And so I thought, well, okay. A few years later, I walked into 707 North Highway 24, And I talked to Dick and Jan, and that began a career, basically, in the outdoor industry. One of the greatest things that I know about Dick is he was a gadget guy. Oh my gosh. And it seemed that Mountain Sport House was his go-to vendor for gadgets. And the shipment would come in and he'd come down from upstairs, we'd open the box, check the packing list, and he'd pull out all these gadgets and tell us about the gadgets. And oh my gosh, there were shoestrings that were springy, that, oh my gosh. Swiss Army knives with orange peelers, multi-tools like the Leatherman. And we would take these gadgets out on field testing clinics, and we would go into the Collegiate Peaks Wilderness area. We'd go to Moab sometimes, and we'd go into 4 Mile. But the ultimate in gadgets was one winter we decided we were going to go out and we were going to field test 3.5 season tents to see just how good they were in the winter. Along with that, there were sleeping pads and headlamps that we were going to test. And we were headed up County Road 365 up to the Horn Fork Basin Trailhead. And as we got up there, all our gear is in the trailhead van, and we get up there and there's a teepee tent, a nylon teepee tent already standing. And, you know, Dick had come up and he had set up the teepee tent. And we throw out the gear from the trailhead van and we find our place for our tents and throw in our gear, and we gather in the teepee tent. And Dick pulls out, off the floor, this black nylon bag that is maybe about 3 feet long, maybe 10 inches wide, and starts pulling out shiny metal pieces. And there's tubes, and there's this flat metal thing that has hinges on it, and whiz-o-bango, he puts this wood-burning stove together. And what it was is a prototype tent that Mountain Smith had created, and somehow Dick had gotten a hold of one of only 6 of these tents, and we were field testing it up towards Horn Fork Basin. And I can remember thinking, oh my God, here we are in a nylon tent with a wood-burning stove. And you know, of course, there were freeze-dried meals that we had that night, and Dick boiled water on that stove. And we had hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps, and we had tea, and we sat around in our Crazy Creek chairs and just talked about everything. And nowadays, when I go into a sporting goods store, REI or Cabela's, I gravitate towards the gadgets. I'm looking in the gadget case, or I find the aisle that has the gadgets there, and I'll pick one up, and I'll look at it, and I'll go, oh my gosh, I wonder what Dick would think of this one. And gadgets. He was a gadget guy, and I love him for that.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Leah.
You can clap.
Lots of stories and a lot of years to cover.
Yeah, I'm Bob Gray, the other half of Margie there. And I want to be here because these guys are great. And Ken, awesome, the things you had to say.
Thanks, brother.
Really good. Margie and I moved here in 1972, same time Dick and Jan moved here. And I remember driving down Main Well, it was actually paved, that was the only paved.
Yeah.
Up Main Street, the highway through town, where their little first thing, there was a little billboard out there that said, maps. And I thought, there's somebody here that sells maps. I went in, and I think Dick was probably working at Climax. Him and Jan both did everything they could to make a living in this town, and we did the same. It was such a tiny little dirt streets and boardwalks place, but they had this vision, and I met Dick, and then there was a rope and like 2 carabiners and pitons, something like that. And I thought, boy, this is the start of a pretty slim business. But with you guys, your vision, you built the trailhead, which is still a viable business in town. And how many people forget how that started and got firebombed because some anti-environmental person didn't like what Dick was doing. Dick was the kind of guy that would chain himself to a redwood tree so it wouldn't get cut down. And that, I admire that. He taught me outdoor skills. I started camping out. He introduced me to the Grand Canyon. You kids were about this big. I'll bet it was your first trip into the Grand Canyon.
Yep.
And it was my first trip. We dropped off the North Rim. He taught me how to hike. I think we drank our dishwater. Taught me how to camp, how to conserve water in a desert environment, how to enjoy the outdoors and not have to be fishing every time I was on a river. It was like, just kick back and look at this wonderful place. And we could talk a long time about that trip.
Yeah.
And then later, I even led a trip down, which was death-defying. In the middle of winter, off the North Rim, no trail. That was pretty cool. And we lived through it, right?
Yeah.
So it was just, go ahead, Jen.
No, I said you should tell them about the stovepipe that Leah was.
Yeah, I helped field test at Mountain Smith Tent 2. And we set it up on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, snowshoed forever to get to the rim, set up a base camp, and got that little stove going, and Dick would carry, both you guys carried huge packs. I guess he taught me to do that too. But yeah, we started a fire. It was snowing. There was snow on the ground. We were melting water for our adventure. The next day we were gonna go down off the edge. And that field trip, we discovered that aluminum stovepipes do not handle the heat. And the stovepipe melted right there inside the tent. And I remember grabbing big chunks of snow and so anyway, yeah, I just want to thank you guys, the Scar family. I grew up with you. I was a little older, but I grew up with you. And Dick, thanks so much.
Thank you, Bob.
Let's take a couple more stories in here, and then we'll keep sharing in the other room. Anybody have a topper for that story?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Andrews, and I moved to the Valley in 1984 from the West Slope and found work at the Ruby Mountain Fish Hatchery. And so my first occasion to meet Dick was when the trailhead was north on the highway, and I had heard a rumor that they had a small selection of flies, and I couldn't find trout flies anywhere else. And I walked into the shop, and Dick was there, and they had a small box of flies at that point in time. And I think I remarked that wasn't much of a selection. And his comment was, well, maybe you should open a fly shop. Little did we know. At any rate, once the trailhead became established, I became a regular customer. And it was for twofold reasons. I had a lot of outdoor interests. Particularly at the time, I was just getting to learn how to mountain bike. And I also had a history of rock climbing, and the trailhead provided the equipment and the insight. They had a tidy little under-the-counter guidebook that kind of outlined routes. The other reason that I went there was Dick and Jan had a habit of hiring the cutest girls in the valley. And so I made my way there just to see how cute they were. Over time, I came to rely on Dick, not just to introduce me to the gadgets and the gear and help me continue to upgrade what I was doing, but also to have conversations about the environment and the valley and what we were going to see happening. And, you know, I tried to help where I could. Occasionally he would bring up things that were already mentioned, like the Elephant Rock Dam, what a travesty that would have been for this valley. But also, we talked about Edward Abbey, and we talked about the legacy of the True West. And these were deep conversations, and they continued. I had the good fortune to go on some of the moonlight ski tours, other events. He came to some of our parties, including one heavily debauched New Year's Eve at the Twin Lakes, where I feared for both Jan and Dick's safety. But everybody made it home safe. But one of the things I remember most was I had a daily habit of writing down from my studio, which was where Crave is. I was upstairs in what's now the bridal suite of the little hotel, and if they knew what happened in my studio, it would not be bad. But needless to say, there was a back route into the trailhead through a little single track, through the pinyons and the cactus. And riding in there, I would occasionally bump into Dick when he would be taking the recycling out and doing those things. And it was about that time that Buena Vista was starting to show some growth, and we had heard through the grapevine that somebody was going to be building a fairly large motel complex just to the north of the trailhead. And we talked about that, and I decided that something needed to be done. So for about 3.5 months, I made a habit of every evening dressing up in a ninja suit, riding my bike back to that single track and ditching it, and then crawling around the pinions and moving the surveyor stakes around. Held up Brady to the ground in the Best Western. And one of the days I was doing that, I was coming out, and Dick was taking the cardboard out, and he saw me come out in my ninja suit, and he went, "I saw nothing." And I just had this fond memory of every time I came in, he had this grin on his face. It was someplace between amusement and confusion over what might happen next. And that I always appreciated that, because he added so much to this community, and is one reason that I love the balance we have with all the people I see here that I know. We love this valley for what it is, and that was his vision, was not to lose the soul of this place, and to make sure that the legacy going forward is a 1/4 mile up any trail. It's still the same valley that it was when I got here in 1986 in that day. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Stuart.
I'm Andy Herb. My family moved here in '82, and sorry, I try to keep it together. So we moved here in '82, but we would come every summer to visit as far as I can remember back. And I just wanted to say the trailhead was a cornerstone of our family. Like every Christmas, half the gifts under our tree were from the trailhead. My first cross-country skis, my first hiking boots, my first backpack, my first everything that I used outside came from the trailhead. And the one thing that stuck with me the most was a Sierra cup. I don't know if you guys had those, but they were the metal cups you put on your belt. And we would go hiking with Dick, and I'm the same age as Kathy, so we all grew up together. And we go drinking out of all the streams around the valley. And I still kind of want to try that.
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous now. I don't know why it's so different now. I also wanted to say that I grew up a little, how do I say, redneck. I was out in my truck tearing things up all the time. But my experiences at the trailhead, Dick was always there, Jan, smiling. Also exposed me to Edward Abbey, and the book selection that you guys had in the shop was great. And I'd like to think that Dick and Jan, oh gosh, sorry.
You got
Dick and Jan had something to do with me becoming an ecologist and having more respect for the environment. I've been a practicing professional ecologist now for 25 years. And that my experiences at the trailhead and in the backcountry with Dick and Jan and Ken and Kathy, I think have something to do with that career choice. So thank you. Nice words, Ken. Nice job.
Andy, nice words from you, buddy. Thank you. That means a lot, Andy.
Wonderful sharing. One more? Joe Greiner.
Yep, I'm Joe Greiner. We moved our business, Lawrence Square, here in 1985. And we all mowed our way into 305 Cedar with our commercial business, which is a 600 square foot house in a neighborhood. And not the most appropriate location for that country these days. But we used the town parking lot because we had no parking. And managed to get the town park built and started launching from there. And as a thank you, we always did a Locals Appreciation Day and took lots of folks from the town. And Dick and Jan always came with us. And that was a good pat on the back to say, welcome to the community, and I thank you for that. And also, Dick, on one of his trips to DC, took me along and we lobbied for Browns Canyon National Monument. And he kind of showed me around and the ropes of Congress, so I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you all for the powerful and beautiful sharing. So now you have a big picture of how he's touched everyone's lives so powerfully and profoundly in this community. Thank you for that sharing as a relative newbie to this place 15 years ago. I love hearing about all the history and the efforts to preserve. It's really powerful. And Kathy would like to share some closing words with us.
Gosh, thanks so much for those wonderful stories. My little slip of paper, there it is. Okay. I knew that I wouldn't be able to be super personal, so I have something written down. Just again, want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everybody. Everybody who came today, everybody who sent cards and well wishes. We just appreciate all of you so much. On the back of your little program today is this beautiful poem that is written by Gwen Frostick. This poem has had a lot of meaning for both Mom and Dad over the years. Mom really searched for this poem after Dad passed, and we were able to find it typed out on a Rocky Mountain Expeditions sheet of stationery. So it was sent to them after the traumatic event that Ken talked about, the search and rescue mission where one of their friends was found in the avalanche. Someone sent this poem to them back in '75, and it sort of signifies the circle of life. If you read it later, it's really wonderful. To quote a line from it, many years, many winters, springs, and falls will pass, and new life replaces this tree. So I wouldn't doubt that Dad had questions prior to that traumatic event, questions about the afterlife and what happens after this life. But I know from letters that we have found, because we all know that Dad was a keeper of all things, the file cabinets in their house is incredible.
Ridiculous.
But from letters that we have found, I know that that was a turning point, as Ken mentioned. He thought about a lot about what happens next. And we have, as a family, known for a long time that Dad wanted to come back as a raven in the Grand Canyon after this life. And so, I truly hope that he's soaring over his favorite spots today, like Deer Creek Falls, Jump Up Canyon, and Nankoweap. Flying in seconds over what would have taken him hours to hike. That's what we used to love, is watching those birds fly so quickly over the canyon, and just 20 seconds in there, that's what took us all day to hike. So I hope that that's where he is today. Maybe he's even breaking into some poor hiker's food cache just to cause a little trouble, right, Kay? Yep. In any case, we know that he contemplated this issue of afterlife for many years. So I'd like to finish this part of our program with some words that he actually wrote for all of us. We just came across these in some of his letters. And then after this, we'd love for you guys to join us in the back and maybe share some more memories. But these words were actually written by him some years ago, and we just found them. And I know that he would love for you all to hear them. So this is a quote from my dad. One second. Okay, death is a life-changing experience. I wish I could communicate with you now, somehow. Phone, email, Facebook, or Skype. Then you would know for sure that there is consciousness after death on earth. And maybe I could tell you some of what to expect. Thanks again.
Thank you all so much for sharing, family and friends, and extended family and community. I'm going to invite the family to go into the fellowship hall, and hope that you